Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Wirex Crypto Podcast. I'm your host, Lianna, and I'm very happy to introduce our guest for today, Kara Howard, co-founder of C3. Welcome, Kara.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here today. We're exploring how Web3 is truly handling diversity and inclusion. We'll look at where we're making progress, where we're falling short, and what more can be done to support diverse voices. So how about we start with how you got into Web3, Kara?
Great. Yes, so I've been in the tech industry for, I think, about 10 years now. And my journey was a kickoff from first half of my career was in finance. And when I transitioned into the tech industry as a marketer, I found myself once again in a pretty masculine-dominated industry. And I'm really happy that, around that same time, I found my purpose, which didn't really kind of fully come to be until I realized several years later, this is something I'm super passionate about, which is women in tech and supporting women in tech in different ways. So for this last period, I've been creating communities that support women in developing themselves professionally with a strong focus on public speaking. I see that they are often women that develop themselves as speakers, and at whatever stage they're at, it really supports themselves, supports their self-confidence personally and professionally. So it's something I really love to focus on. It supported me a lot when I got active on that track. And so now here we are in Web3. And, there's similar challenges in this industry in terms of representation and inclusion. But, we're making progress. And interestingly, of research, and from what we can find, there's close to 150 women in Web3 communities. So I've found my focus to be once again in supporting with tools and resources for women in emerging tech and Web3 in creating their personal profiles, developing themselves professionally, and then supporting organizations, blockchains, protocols, and foundations in becoming more impactful in their DEI practices. So that's landing me to the present moment here.
That's amazing. And we'll get into women in Web3 communities a lot deeper later. But firstly, how do you see financial inclusion evolving in the Web3 space right now? Are there any areas where we're falling short?
Well, yes, there is. And the good thing is that for the most part, people, the industry is relatively aware of this. So that's always a good thing. There was a great research report put out last year by BCGX, and they partnered with people in Crypto Lab and did a pretty comprehensive research study, which is important. We always have to have the data first to better understand what things need to be, redirected. And so some key data points from that are comparing Web3 to Web2, for example. In terms of representation numbers, the number of people employed at Web3 organizations, women in Web3 are 27% of the industry as of 2020. Compared that to Web2 data, and that Web2 data is 33%. So we're seeing, roughly 5% less women in Web3 than in Web2 tech. And those numbers are already pretty low. So a quarter of the industry comprises of women in Web3. So that's a nice data point to look at to start, right? So, generally we'd probably want to get something closer to a balance of 50-50 generally. Then if you drill down into the tech-related Web3 roles, so these are programmers, engineers, etc. In Web3, women consist of 12%. And these specific roles. And then in Web2 technical roles, that's 25%. So half of the engineers that exist in Web2 exist in Web3. And then If you think about that 12% number, that means almost 90% of the technical roles are in Web3 are held by men. So that to me is a huge data point there. That's also kind of, we see it the effects of this trickling out into the industry in a number of ways. Because we're an early-ish industry, a lot of what most organizations are focused on are building the tools that we need. So that's why when you go to the LinkedIn profiles of a lot of companies, it can be shocking because you'll see, oh my gosh, this company exists with 20 employees and I see one woman. You know, she's the chief of staff or she is in the marketing. And that would be the data, say a couple of women, right? Out of several women, maybe out of 20. Sometimes you see less. So now the ways that can actually affect the industry as a whole, well, now you're looking at tools and technologies that are being developed from the lens of a certain demographic, right? So we hear a lot about that within, say, the development of AI, and that, you know, can create a lot of barriers for those participating in the AI where they're not represented. And another thing we're seeing is that the majority of the funds in Web3, from VC funding to grant funding, the vast majority are going to men, therefore, because many of the grants and projects are being funded still at the technical stages. So you see that these are held by men. So that's, we can get into this a little bit more in a discussion here, but I wanted to frame that up because, there's a lot of opportunity here. We're at an interesting stage of the industry. We're now getting more into adoption and growth. We're going just beyond just the build stage. And another great data point is that diverse teams actually financially outperform versus those that are non-diverse. So there's a McKinsey study that shared this, and it's in the range of 30 to 35% of financial performance increase when you have a diverse team. So this is something, that people often look at diversity as a moral issue, and we like to look at it as more of a financial performance potential issue. So we'll get more into a little bit more into that today, I hope.
That's a really great way of looking at it. Instead of it being a moral issue, but a financial issue, right? And the numbers, the data is shocking. How can we truly ensure that funding supports diverse projects? What needs to change in how funding is managed in Web3, you think?
Yes, thank you. This is something I love to explore, and we're going pretty deeply in exploring as an organization. So if you think about how is funding distributed, well, it would be through VC funding and grant funding for the majority of the projects. There was a really cool research report that was distributed last year it was researched by Michelle Wakar and her partner Eugene. Michelle is from Octane. They did a very comprehensive study of the grant funding space, and it was something in the number of $500 million distributed in grants that they were researching and finding information about the efficacy of those grant distributions. So that kind of gives a size to the market, right? And it's very exciting that Web3 even offers grants. That's not something that's offered in Web2 generally. So that's something we're really strongly focused on. I think on the VC side, there's a ton of conversations already happening around that in many, many ways, in many industries. So I kind of don't focus on that as much as an organization. Also because we don't really have a strong support for the VC model in general. It doesn't feel very decentralized or democratized, so it doesn't feel to us something that's really aligned with Web3 values. So that's why we're focusing really on the grant funding space and seeing that this is a really exciting time for this funding model to now evolve into growing and reaching other additional demographics. On the grant funding side of Web3, if you've been aware or participated in any of them, what we've seen is, a lot being built. A lot of tools had to be built just to distribute the grant forms, the grant funds, all the processes. That's taken several years. And that makes sense. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and often with very small teams distributing. So now we're getting into this phase where those tools and structures have been built. And we see that organizations are really starting to become aware of the data where available, but also just they can see from their applicants the small distribution of funds going to women. There is no hard data on this yet. So this is not being tracked other than organizations are maybe doing some internal tracking. This is where, after receiving grant funds ourselves and participating in rounds, I saw, okay, I don't have the hard data, but I can tell maybe it's something in 20% range or less going to women. So what can we do to improve that? And we've initiated a program called FIX, and it stands for Financial Inclusion XX Chromosomes. And what this is a 6-month working group and DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, education program for chains, protocols, and foundations that offer grant programs. So the first step is really initiating this awareness with the organizations, facilitating education on how they can improve their DEI practices within their organization and grant programs, and then helping them measure that. So this is something, I love to talk about, support the grant model and see people getting very excited about this. We're tech people. We love to track things, and there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think, there are a lot of grants out there. And sometimes I do see, there's a lot of, like crypto bros, right? Like and it's not to be, one side or the other, like, in terms of gender, but, at the end of the day, the data does show that, women are not really truly supported, right? And so I really love what you're doing. And what's the one thing you think Web3 could be doing more to support diversity and inclusion that isn't talked about enough?
Yes, to pick one, I think we have to explore something that's broad. I think it's really important to understand the end goal. And the end goal, I think, for most of us is that we're building for wide adoption. So if we're building for wide adoption, this means we want to have people all over the world utilizing these tools that we're building. And so therefore you look at the full funnel of how can you reach these demographics? Well, these demographics need to be connected into the ecosystem in ways that they understand. So if you're someone from Africa, it's really exciting actually what's happening there because there's so many young people adopting crypto. It would make sense that you're going to want to learn and adopt from people like you that understand your culture, that understand your barriers, that understand the applications that work within your region. This is to me a very, targeted distribution strategy versus what I see often happening now in the education space. In some ways, we have a lot of educators along with the teams that we just talked about that are coming from one demographic of white males of a certain socioeconomic status. So that's where the disconnect is. If you think about, okay, you've got those builder types, and then you've got this, you've got this these unique demographics in all the regions around the world that have their own interests and ways to relate to what we're building or not relate that we need to be aware of. So this is where I think the most important thing that Web3 could do is focus its energy on those end, say, customers, users, adopters, and start from there and work your way back versus the other way around. So that's why we're very excited about the Women in Web3 community leader space and have spent a lot of energy on researching who these organizations are and their leaders. We have some initiatives we're kicking off to help us unify and aggregate us, because for the most part, a lot of these women are from different regions in the world. So in our mind, the best way to distribute information is from these regional leaders. And of course, we would love for these to be women. I mean, how empowering and meaningful to learn about the new economy from the demographic that was completely missed out in the first version or the most recent version, right? So that's our main focus, really, is bringing their voices out, bringing their education out, and helping distribute this with tools and resources to a wider demographic.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit deeper. Bringing together women in Web3 communities. Can you tell us more about this effort and its impact so far?
Yes, I would love to. So, so as I mentioned, we saw okay, there's quite a few women in Web3 communities out there. It's very cool that there's some collaboration between them, but everyone is generally focused on their own projects and their own initiatives. Of course, we're also busy doing so. So that's why, in addition to having our own community within C3 called See Her, where we focus on professional development and public speaking, we said, okay, let's take a step back and look at this at an ecosystemic level. And we're now at the stage of this industry where we saw a lot of women Web3 communities started, a few years ago, a couple of years ago, and new ones also popping up regularly. But we were saying, okay, what can we do to make this easier for us to interconnect? Not necessarily all becoming one, just as an aggregator. So the first thing that we're initiating is a community aggregation page, web page. So the community leaders are adding their projects or their communities to this page. We're publishing it, and that way people can come in to our site and see a list of all the different communities that are out there that we could find and want to participate, and search this page. So that's a simple framework to start with. And then we have our membership community and a platform called Common Ground. I love sharing about Common Ground because they're literally building just that, a place for Web3 to find common ground. And it's a Discord alternative, and was created to be a bit more community-centric in terms of their structures, their features, so that ecosystems and organizations can interconnect. So we actually have an ecosystem ourselves within Common Ground, which means we can tag and aggregate other communities within ours. So this is a large goal that will probably take some time, but hoping that, picture right now, the majority of the women Web3 communities, they're in Telegram groups, they're in WhatsApp groups, they're on Discord. A lot of us are part of 5 to 10 at the same time, and it's really hard to keep up with what's happening. And so this is going to allow us to be able to be discovered together. And everyone has their different interests, right? If you're a woman in India coming into Web3, well, you're probably going to want to join India-based Web3 organizations for women. And maybe you want to join a couple other virtual groups that align with your interests. So this is something that we're also starting right now. And then lastly, the content and education that we're providing within our ecosystem is highly targeted towards women in Web3 community leaders. And we have a strong monetization focus with the education and the partners that we're offering. So it's hard, for the community leaders sometimes to figure out other monetization strategies. And especially when it seems like often organizations are focused on, or the market's more like a Web2 centric model. How many members do you have? What is the size of things? It's to us a lot less about that and more about the strategic impact that you're having on a number of members. So we're introducing a partnership with Unlock Protocol, where organizations can create membership NFTs and event NFTs. And there's different ways to monetize with their tool. And we're encouraging community leaders to focus on that so they can stay alive and be supported financially, which means, potentially having a membership subscription model with the core people of your community versus having a Telegram group with 1,000 members where you're not making any money, but you're creating a lot of content and it's not quite as focused as it could be. So that's what we're excited to work on. It'll probably be, a long-term project, and excited to see how it goes.
There's a lot happening in your camp, and I love it.
Yeah.
And I think, you touched on something that's so important, discovery. And I think, having this aggregation tool is definitely going to help, right, with the discovery of women-led projects. And, because, especially in the Web3 space, there's so much going on, but sometimes it's really hard to find your place, right? And your lane, and I'm really, really, really glad that you're doing this aggregation tool, for the discovery of more women-based projects. And, so how do you balance making an impact with making money, especially for projects led by women or diverse teams?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's interesting because I think sometimes people see those things as separate, and it's interesting because there are so many barriers, like we've talked about, right? Just representation issues, but some of those barriers are also, say, self-developed. And there's a lot of studies, and just in my own experiences as a woman, and also working with many, self-confidence, self-advocacy, these things are challenges often for women. So I always invite women into, breaking through those limiting beliefs about not being good enough, not understanding, not being technical enough, and investing in yourself. So I feel it's a two-way street, that it's not only for us to look at the industry and say, kind of maybe in a victim mindset, we're not being included, we're not being represented. Well, yeah, that's true. There are definitely, it can be hard to feel included when you're one of many, one of few women. But at the same time, this is in some ways, there's a lot of opportunity in a meritocratic-ish space for women to step up. And this includes investing in yourself. So we see a lot of the programs and things around women and Web3 and tech in general to be kind of this donation, charity, sponsorship model, which is, to me, makes sense for those that are coming from emerging markets where there's not the same level of income to be able to participate in some of these paid programs. That's what we actually offer in our membership community, which is $300, a one-time fee. So noting that for people in different regions, that number is very different in their discretionary income levels. And at the same time, encouraging women to stretch themselves, to invest in themselves. Men much more often invest in themselves and in general. So that's what I'm saying. This feels like a two-way street, that we bring more visibility to women. We bring women to the forefront in different, virtual spaces with grant funding programs just for women, tracking the metrics for women, And that's all the pieces that are happening and are getting started in bigger ways. Also, I want to mention too, another great way to bring more money to women, noting that we aren't in the developer, landscape so much, is it's very exciting that we're now moving into this growth stage as an industry. So that means marketers, communication managers, brand managers, these roles that are often held by women are going to be more and more needed and funded. So even grant funding programs have initiated for marketing, community growth, business development. So we'll start seeing more money coming to women inherently with that. And so, yeah, there's quite a few of these factors, but I would really love to see women standing up for this themselves, coming into leadership and seeing the open pie for themselves and taking action.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because investing in ourselves as women, sometimes that is a last priority, right? And especially if you've got a family, if you want to take a course, but that the cost of that course, could feed your kids for the next week or so, whatever, right? And so sometimes you've got to make that judgment call. But, I'm so glad that you're advocating, for women to invest in themselves because, most of the time, I think where, we lack the confidence, right? Sometimes, to take that first step or to stand up for something that we believe in. So yeah, I'm really, really pleased to hear about, you advocating for women to invest in themselves because it really is an investment. You've got to take pride and you've got to believe in yourself that you can do it, right? And be the change that you want to see in the world, So, and what do you see as the biggest challenge for underrepresented groups trying to enter the Web3 space, and how can we help overcome these barriers? I know you talked a little bit about that and with regards to women, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yes, thank you. I really try to do my best to explore and research and connect with emerging markets. I mean, I live in Latin America now myself, originally from the US, and that's actually opened up my mind even more, just understanding barriers and not feeling, when you live in the US or Europe, maybe I haven't lived there, but I remember kind of feeling like I was in the center. And to a degree, you kind of are, maybe less now if US isn't quite leader it used to be, and also in the crypto markets. But I'm seeing that that there's so much opportunity in the emerging markets for adoption, and in speaking with them, they often share that there's unconscious bias that happens in terms of receiving job opportunities and grants. And there are educational differences, right, along with cultural differences. So it was very encouraging, actually, to hear a grant program operator speak at our last event, and they shared about just honestly, they're receiving applications from different parts of the world for grants, and there's different styles. Maybe one could say educational levels, but also noting there's just different, it's a different, maybe sometimes less experienced applicant than maybe what they would, from a developed country have seen as being intelligent, right? Or being funding worthy. And that's the first step, is really noting that. And this is what we're going to dive deep into in our 6-month working group with DEI experts and grant program operators, because this unconscious bias is deep, and like you said, we can't really be what we can't see, be what you could see. So we're so accustomed to seeing people in developed worlds, like people like us, and at level of access, come to this conference here in the US or Europe. Buy this ticket for $1,000 in euros. I do interviews with the ladies in the emerging markets, and they share and they just feel often so disconnected. But it's encouraging to see organizations like Arbitrum, for example. They have community growth and education rounds with Questbook happening, and they have a super strong emerging markets focus. So I believe that's what they're only thing they're funding. And these are large grant sizes. And I'm like, oh, this is great. So not only, again, is it actually only for moral issues, it's for adoption and potential issues. If you look at the metrics of how one's quality of life could improve based on adopting crypto and Web3, this is massive for countries that have had no access or little access to even banking, digital banking. So this is where I think we see a lot of challenges, and people are aware of it. And that's the first step, is bringing awareness in it. Then comes the education, which we're hoping to help support in the organization. And I like to see the things like ambassador programs starting, initiating within certain organizations. Push Protocol is a great example. I love their organization. And they have ambassador teams and a strong focus in India, Africa, and Latin. And they're paying their ambassadors to advocate for them with technical training. And it's been fantastic, actually, as a partner, because we receive a lot of support for that. So this, to me, is an example of ways that organizations can support new entrants in the emerging markets in jobs, training, and education, and making real impact.
Yeah. And sometimes I think, there is that fear too that, companies or brands are just trying to reach a quota per se, right? Where they have women at the table, but not necessarily have the power at the table, not necessarily have that voice at the table. So, I think there are a lot of barriers that we kind of need to work through. But it's exciting, we're living in really exciting times. And I think with Web3 is really changing the way we connect, the way we collaborate, the way we work together, the way we see the world, right? And so how can, what practical steps have you found effective in driving real change for underrepresented groups in Web3?
Well, for us, that's what I can speak to the most because I'm most aware of it. We have really focused a lot on bringing members into our community from the emerging markets. So that's actually been the majority of our focus. And we offer them scholarships. We bring them into education programs and leadership opportunities. So some of them are becoming speakers and leading workshops in our membership platform. So for me, I was like, this, not only looking at it from a moral issue, but actually mostly looking at it from this potential issue. I think it's the research out there that's showing what are the regions that are most fastest growing and have the most potential. Well, it's not the US or Europe. So that was actually what I looked at. Like, okay, well, these are the most exciting regions right now, and with the greatest adoption happening and potential. Well, let's onboard them. So we do have members from all over the world. The majority actually are from emerging markets. And so I think that's, something that could be replicated, say, for for the grant program operators, of course, like I mentioned with Arbitrum already doing that, having an emerging market focus for their grant funding. And also this, can be incorporated within product development. So, I've seen some really cool organizations like the Onboard Wallet that has initiatives partnering with different regional groups around the world. And they understand that widespread adoption includes, these demographics. And so their marketing campaigns, their landing pages, they're easy to understand what they're doing. They show diverse representation and they're accessible. That is something I think that could be a lot stronger within many of the organizations in Web3 because a lot of the founders and leaders are technical. So when you go to their websites, you'll see how the technical jargon, and you'll even for me, as someone in Web3, I feel like this is not for me, So I think we're going to see that shift happening and kind of evolving the messaging and value propositions and all those things that come within front-facing applications, consumer-facing applications. The language is going to evolve. And as that does, I really hope that we all push for that focus to be more mainstream, and even looking at these markets that we talked about, that are fast growing in Asia, Latin America, Africa. So I hope that gives a little bit of perspective.
Yeah, it does. And I kind of want to circle back to what you said at the start of this podcast, which was, I'm paraphrasing, but, it's the proverb of each one teach one, right? So, and I think, that way of like education and having that mindset of whatever you learn, you teach the other, I feel like that's really, really important. And so if you had to rate Web3's commitment to diversity and inclusion, what would your rating be and why? This is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Don't hold back, Sarah. Don't hold back.
I'm going to put it as 5. It's not a 3 because I see and I hear and I talk to so many people that are doing great work and have really committed and trying to do their best. They're just very busy. So I see that it's not, for the most part, like something that's systemic, I don't feel, where maybe that would be the case in the traditional tech worlds, and those older industries, that is like pretty tough to crack in my perspective. Here we are, yes, the data in Web3 is showing pretty terrible numbers for all the things we mentioned, but I don't see this as the long-term numbers. This was just, it definitely needs to be brought way into awareness, and is, but, this is the earliest days of the industry. So, yeah, I think that we've got a lot of opportunity. That's why I'll put in places right in the middle right now.
Yeah, I kind of always say that, we're still building the plane while flying it, right? So, and I think we're still in early days, because there's so much more to kind of unpack, right? With Web3, and how we can really use Web3 to make a change in the world. I mean, I kind of touched on this earlier, but I was just wondering, do you ever feel that push for diversity and inclusion in Web3 is just for show? And how can we ensure that it's a genuine and lasting commitment?
I mean, I do think that, I don't know if I would say just for show. I think that might be a little strong, but I'm sure it exists. But I do think there can always be with organizations, you look at your speaker list and you say, okay, where am I at with my diversity here? So yeah, sometimes there's, one woman that exists in this niche industry, and she has to be is asked to be a speaker often. And actually a lot of women, I know it's exhausting for them because there are so few. They get asked all the time to speak. But, I think that, this is something that's mostly well-intentioned, but to make this actually demonstratable performance-wise, this is where this needs to get a little bit more into measurement and tracking. So when you have a grant fund program, for example, and you committed some targets to funding 40% women, for example, well, that needs to be measured and tracked. And then you continue on through that beyond just, okay, what happened with the money in terms of diversity? Now we're talking about, let's track the financial performance, like we talked about towards the beginning. This is where I'm very excited and wanting to see, and actually we're building some tools to support this. Track, what is the performance of a women-led project versus none? This is what major organizations and research organizations are studying. And when you show some of those numbers, that's when it's going to really drive impact. So I'm hoping that with our, technical expertise here as an industry, that we utilize data as it's available and work from there.
Yeah, I love that. And I also feel like, going back to one of your points earlier, is having women invest in themselves, right? And to have that confidence to stand up for their rights, so that it's not just for show, because we kind of spoke about the having women at the table, but, not necessarily having a voice per se, right? So I think that also comes down to confidence and that investment in self, right? In developing ourselves to be more confident, to actually, speak out and say, that doesn't look right or that doesn't feel right, for these groups or these communities. So yeah, I think we do have, I think we have made progress, but there is still a long way to go. But then again, life is complex, right? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just, I encourage everyone listening to think about ways that they might have any limiting beliefs for themselves and explore a program that's out there that can support you or a community in breaking through those limiting beliefs. I think that's really close to what you talked about there. And we're, around self-confidence and all of that, because all of those things generally are not true that we're telling ourselves. And of course it comes with experience, so yeah, I love to see women, especially when they are really, growing themselves. Yes, it takes a lot of effort, but they're taking on education programs. They're traveling where available to conferences. They're saying yes to podcast interviews or even advocating for themselves. One thing that we offer at our membership platform is we offer our members their own See Her Web3 pages, we call them, which is a landing page, but it's built on Web3 tools. And this is a way for them to showcase themselves in a professional way. And then we have a database of speaking opportunities at podcasts and conferences that we share with them. So we invite them to self-advocate and represent themselves by reaching out to these conferences and podcasts and saying, hey, I want to speak. Once a month is a really nice cadence if you can do it. And you'll notice yourself getting more and more visible, more and more, say, leads and connections for your business. And then for me, this happened where my self-confidence just skyrocketed. And that even translated into my personal life. There was no separation. I felt more and more confident in so many ways. People were like, oh, I see Kara again at this conference. Okay, I'm speaking again at this conference. Yes, I am. And now it's kind of like those limiting beliefs are pretty much dissolved for me now. And I hope that can happen for others too.
I love that. And I love that, confidence is contagious.
Yeah, exactly. True.
3 diversity efforts, Cara. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
To all our fantastic listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Don't forget to express your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. Thank you for tuning in, and until we meet again, stay well.